Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dee Logan. I'm a project manager at the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research and our Learning and Working Research and Rehabilitation Training Center. We will be getting started just about now. I wanted to let folks know that if you need captioning services, they are a live stream captioning service, and the link is in the chat box that I sent to everyone. And thank you so much for attending our webinar today. And I'm just going to go over a couple brief housekeeping items so you know that the webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research's website. I look for it in a week or so. And participants are automatically muted when you join. And please, if you're calling in using your phone, enter your unique audio PIN. If you have any audio problems, you can check the settings in the GoToWebinar audio tab. We will be having a Q&A session after the presentations are complete. And you'll be able to use the questions box to type your questions in to participate. If you do have any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can email the organizer, that's me, deirdre.logan@umassmed.edu, or use the questions tab to send us a message. I wanted to acknowledge our funder, NIDLR. We are funded from NIDLR for a Research and Training and Rehabilitation Center grant. And without that funding, this presentation wouldn't be possible. And I want to thank our presenters, Paul Cherchia, Debbie Nicolellis, Rebecca Johnson, and Vanessa Klodnick for today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul to start. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, Dee. So I am here to talk about a program that we actually run in conjunction with UMass Medical, which is the Peer Academic Supports for Success, or better known as PASS. Everything is an acronym here, so you'll probably hear us use that acronym quite a bit. What we really want to do is kind of just talk about how we took our PASS program and transitioned in the 2020 to the 2021 academic year to make it more virtual and still accessible for students that were on campus or that were unable to come to campus and still be able to connect and use that support. Again, my name is Paul Cherchia, and I'm here with my colleague, Dorothy Hutchinson.
Hi, everyone.
And we are from Boston University's Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation. So we always like to just quickly orient to what the plan is. Here's our agenda. We'll just briefly talk about who we are. We will outline the PASS program a little bit more in detail, and we'll talk about how we adapted in the COVID academic year. Certainly we had some successes, and we'll continue to build on those, and then we definitely felt some challenges too, and we'll highlight those as well. We'd love to talk about kind of how we move forward, you know, where we can kind of go from this, the good and the bad, and then we'd love to take questions if you have them. So again, my name is Paul Cherchia. I'm at the Center for Psych Rehab at BU. I'm a licensed mental health counselor by training. However, at the center, I primarily teach as an instructor in classes, and I also coach college students one-on-one, and I'm also the peer academic coach supervisor, so that's PASS. I supervise all of the coaches that work within the program, and I will let Dory introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am also at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation here at BU. I am the incoming executive director of the center, and I've been a longtime director of services at the center, where we provide recovery education to both adults in the greater Boston community. And since 2000, we've been providing college mental health services to students from all over the United States who live in the area, who need support and skill development to finish college and go on to hopefully a full life while living well with a serious mental health condition. And I'm also one of the co-investigators on the PASS project with Paul and Mary Ann Davis.
Thank you, Dory. And it's important too, just to talk about the work that we do at the center, because I think our psychiatric rehabilitation principles really inform the peer coaching program too, and how we kind of go about that. So I'm going to have Dory just talk a little bit more in depth about what peer academic coaching is.
So this whole project has come out of, as I mentioned, 2 decades of our work in supporting students who are living with serious mental health conditions. And what we've learned through our experiences and from the voices of all the thousands of students that we've helped in these 20 years is the importance of what we like to call at the elbow coaching. Many of our students are often given lists from offices of things to do, go find this therapist, go do these tasks, and they don't happen because people need support and they also need skill development. So we've really worked hard at defining what we do in terms of coaching. And on the left side of the screen, you will see our principles of coaching. We are very wellness oriented. And probably most importantly, we are relationship focused and student centered or person centered. As we are a psychiatric rehabilitation program, we start with people's strengths and we try to help students build on those strengths. In our coaching approach, this is a voluntary service that students, they want to have coaching. They're not prescribed coaching and they're not mandated coaching. We don't talk about compliance with coaching. This is a relationship that we hope will support their academic journey. And it's very, very active. We work alongside in a mutual relationship with students. They have work to do and we have work to do, and we do it together, as we say, at the elbow. In our coaching, we focus on a variety of areas that the research and our experience has shown to be really critical to student success. So executive functioning skills. We talk a lot about resiliency, and when we talk about resiliency, we're talking about emotional agility as well as stress coping abilities. We focus a lot on helping students build their social support networks. Loneliness is a huge issue for students with mental health conditions on campuses. Academic self-efficacy, helping students be able to be empowered in their relationships and in their work on campus. Self-determining their goals and their activities, developing that sort of independent mindset of what's important to them, because we know that builds persistence when people self-determine their goals. And the ultimate goal of our coaching is that students graduate, because we know that having some form of higher education is really, really important in people's career trajectory for people with mental health conditions.
All right, so Dory talked a little bit about our principles of coaching and our targets of coaching, but sometimes it's helpful to kind of see what I call a menu of coaching. And when I'm supervising the coaches, I kind of say, you need to kind of outline all of the things that we can be doing in coaching, because it goes much further than just academics. We know that there's a lot of different areas in students' wellness that end up affecting their academics from a trickle-down effect. So this is kind of a menu that I like to certainly present to the coaches and then have them present that to the student. These are all different types of things that we can be doing. First and foremost, coaching is doing. It's solution focused, it's action oriented, it's collaborative, and we're doing it together. If you are spending the entire coaching meeting talking back and forth and there's nothing actually happening, that is not coaching. So this is kind of a little bit of an example. Like, we're sending emails to professors, we're breaking down that intimidation that students might feel. We're signing up students for office hours. We're sharing different coping techniques and we're practicing them within the coaching sessions. We're bringing the student to the gym. We're not just saying it might be helpful to go to the gym. Of course it's going to be helpful to go to the gym. Everyone feels good after working out, but sometimes just walking in the door is the biggest barrier. It's such an overwhelming place, especially at Boston University's Fitness and Recreation Center. So walk in with them, right? You don't even have to work out with them. Walk through the door and be that collaborative piece to help kind of expose them to some resources on campus. We do a lot of goal setting. We might introduce journaling, SMART goals specifically. We'll help with registration and deadlines like that. We'll help them get connected socially. I can't tell you, so many students join the program, join the research study, because they're isolated, they're lonely, they don't know how to get connected. Ironically, BU is such a big place with so many people and resources, and yet students sometimes can feel a little stuck, right? So we provide that support to get them connected to clubs, to people, to activities on campus. And again, we're not just saying this would be helpful, you should do it. We're helping them do it together. So things are crossed off their to-do list or crossed off their agenda at the end of the meeting, as opposed to kind of building onto it, which can be very overwhelming as well. So I'm hoping that kind of this menu, and certainly the menu can expand beyond this too, gives you an idea of kind of how robust peer coaching is and what we can be doing in it.
And just to be super clear that this coaching is happening by upper class students at the university who are matched with a first or second year student at BU who's identified as living with a mental health condition. And many of our upper class peers, students, also have had lived experiences. And so there is that common experience right away of, they've sort of figured out kind of the way to do this in a way that maintains their well-being and their academic success. So they come in with a great amount of that expertise as well. And then these are the activities that they're doing with their peer that they're matched to.
Great point. So I just kind of wanted to highlight maybe what an activity or kind of a coaching menu item can look like. Again, I emphasize students feeling lonely or disconnected from social connections or different resources on campus. We do a lot of like mapping, right? And when this was in person, this was fun. It was a collaborative activity that the coach and the student could do to kind of recognize that the student actually has a lot of different resources or connections within the community or on campus. And this might be something that we draw, right? We do it together, it's collaborative, it's rapport building, it's fun, and it makes those supports come to life. When we were doing this in person, pen and paper, kind of a lot easier, but there were creative ways to do it online as well. And this is an example of kind of what a map could look like through virtual means. Our tech savvy coaches certainly kind of did things more like this, but certainly other coaches could kind of do a little bit of a watered down version. Either way, the coach needed to kind of make those connections and make those supports come to life. And when you're just talking back and forth and those words are floating through the air, they don't always have as much weight. They don't always mean as much. When you can put it on paper, when you can share a screen, when you can write those down and the student can see it, it tends to mean a lot more and they can refer back to it. So this is an example of maybe what that support map could look like. One potential coaching activity that a coach can be doing with the student. This is our 8 domains of wellness. We always are using SAMHSA's 8 domains of wellness to kind of work through different student goals and way to stay well on the campus and in the community. And this again is an example of a map that we might be doing. We highlighted kind of our top 5 here: emotional, social, financial, physical, occupational. And the coach might just go through each domain with the student to kind of highlight how they stay well in those areas.
And I think part of why this is it was sort of emerged as being a really important activity during COVID as well. And you all probably know from your own personal experience of going through this pandemic that our wellness, everyone's wellness was impacted. And while these are academic coaches, we are very committed to not losing sight of the whole person. Universities tend to focus on the academic side of a student. And what we've learned through our work is it's so important to be comprehensive and wellness oriented so that there's balance. And so using the domains of wellness turned out to be a really important activity for our coaches. It was before the pandemic, but certainly it became even more critical during the pandemic.
So those are just a couple of examples, again, of coaching activities that coaches are doing with students. This is something that I created last fall. This was kind of a map and a tip sheet for our coaches to use with their students when meeting virtually on Zoom. We, at BU, we did have students on campus and it looked very different, but coaches were able to meet with students in person. And we kind of said they would meet outside, 6-foot distance with a mask. So we did kind of have a little bit of a hybrid model, but for the most part, especially through the fall, most of the coaching took place online. What you're seeing here was the kind of a general Zoom tip sheet that I created probably in August or September, and I'm probably much more of an expert on Zoom now than I was when I created this. But this was just a little bit of an example of something we said, here are things that you can be trying, right? Here are things that you can be doing. And I'm not going to read through every tip. This is actually just kind of a smaller version of it. There was probably 15 to 20 tips on it. But I did want to highlight the biggest tip, and this stands true to our program too, that the most important piece for working with students in person or online or on Zoom was to be a peer, to recognize that they're both students and they're going through a very unique time. Their ability to listen and to respond with empathy and validate the student on what they were feeling, that things were hard and frustrating and that their first or second year of college was certainly not going as planned, right? This created this unique relationship, this trusting relationship, and helped a lot of the other activities, a lot of the other kind of coaching relationships fall into place. I couldn't stress this enough in supervision, that the coaching relationship with the student made the entire process easier. And this certainly turned out to be the biggest tip and something that we tried to kind of come back to as well every week.
And I think for as many people experienced, we were living our lives on Zoom, and this was certainly true in this project. As at BU, we all had access to Zoom, and we were able to help students become even more familiar and comfortable with all the different features on Zoom. So many of the in-person coaching activities could happen together on Zoom. Well, that's what we learned. It's obviously not the same, but you could, the coach and the student could do their work together on Zoom, even though they were, maybe someone was in California and someone was in Massachusetts. They could do their work together. And that was often the case. We had students who were all over the country. And I think we even had someone who was out of the country.
Yep.
And so but through Zoom, they could be in the same room, quote unquote, together and do their coaching activities together.
So again, we had a list of tips. This is just kind of a few of them. I think we all know some of these other ones, but being in a good kind of setting to have coaching, having your safe, comfortable spot, screen sharing, of course, referring to different resources. The coach does not need to be the expert on everything, but they need to know kind of who to send the student to, and doing homework or projects collaboratively together. Even just having that accountability with someone across you on the screen can be really helpful too from a production standpoint as well. But first and foremost, being a peer. I think the biggest tip we kind of give in person or certainly virtually, it was even more important. So we've highlighted a little bit, but we kind of want to reiterate how we adapted in our COVID academic year. Again, students were desperate for connection more than ever. We saw isolation, and even just having that connection, via Zoom or however they chose to connect was so important, and having that kind of on a weekly, consistent basis, really important. Putting aside the agenda. So I always kind of say it's helpful for the coaches to set an agenda and use that as a way to kind of work and come back to it and stay on task. Sometimes you just had to throw out the agenda and be with the person and first and foremost connect. And that again kind of ties back to that Zoom tip of being a peer there. We mentioned this, but staying interactive over Zoom, the share screen, the shared documents, study accountability, coaching activities, being creative certainly kept students engaged. And then when we did meet in person or met outside, and again, we're from Boston University, so meeting outside is not always easy in the months of December, January, February, and March. But we, if it was a nice day or it felt like it was a good time to go outside for a walk, to not have to set goals, but just be with each other, be outside, connect, be young adults, talk about current events, get a cup of coffee. That connection too was really helpful. So that was certainly helpful from the peer coaching side of it. From my end, being the peer supervisor, I really had to work a little bit harder on how to connect with the coaches too. I actually never met any of these coaches in person. I interviewed them over Zoom, trained them over Zoom, and met with them weekly over Zoom. And certainly it was harder to kind of have the relationships I've had with other coaches in the past. And that required a lot kind of more one-on-one support with them too. Supervision through a screen was difficult. So even myself being creative, bringing up different topics and engaging them that way, and getting feedback too. How is this going? Is this working for you? Is the messaging coming through? The coaches themselves struggled. They were all young adults, some of them with their own lived experience. So me being aware of that, even kind of paying more attention on the screen and recognizing that, and then reaching out and doing that one-on-one support as well. And this year more than ever required some crisis response too. When our coaches are meeting with a vulnerable population like the ones we coach, sometimes crisis situations do come up, but in the last 5 years since we've been doing this, they've been extremely rare, and we had at least a few this past year. So me really kind of being on contact, not only throughout the work week 9 to 5, but outside of that too, and being available to coaches through my own work cell phone was really important to work some coaches through kind of how to work on the crisis response, and even getting connected with the students to ensure that they were safe as well. But I think that highlights too just the kind of the state that young adults and college students were in this past year. It was really, really difficult, and the support that the coaching program provided was more important than ever.
And since we were providing crisis support to people all over the country, we had to edit and revise our sort of protocols around what we would do if we're in Boston and someone is having a mental health crisis in Los Angeles. And so we did have to programmatically make those changes to kind of have a staggered approach to what we would do, in terms of level of crisis and how we would work through that being geographically apart and electronically apart.
Yeah, and that certainly took some adaptation with our supervision and training in the beginning of the year, and then adapting that throughout. So just kind of some analysis here, some successes. Certainly we saw an increased need for support. It was a lot easier to recruit. Again, this is part of a research study. It was easier to recruit this year as students were looking for more support and any type of connection. We were more accessible too. I mean, there was some, in-person meeting outside, but to hop on Zoom or to connect virtually, sometimes it's easier for students, especially with busy schedules. Coaches could join clubs with students. Sometimes it's hard to kind of walk down and go to that in-person meeting, but they were all online. So a coach could join with the student kind of incognito too, just be there, making sure the student went and felt connected, and then kind of let them be from there. So that certainly provided some flexibility from a scheduling standpoint. I think now more than ever, and hopefully there'll be some changes in the fall and with things opening up, that we recognize the importance of in-person contact and in-person coaching, and that'll be something certainly that we address going forward this year. And we did a lot of creativity to meet outside, whether we were walking or running or doing picnics or just grabbing coffee or meeting in study spaces in a safe way too. I think coaches worked hard to collaborate with each other to come up with ways to make those connections, even if it was difficult at times. So those were some successes. Certainly we had some challenges. As I mentioned, major mental health and social challenges faced by a lot of students, having a hard time to connect over screen when you're meeting for your classes over Zoom, and you're meeting with your advisor over Zoom, and then you're meeting with your peer coach over Zoom and your therapist. There's just burnout with it, and we saw that a lot. And I think that obviously affected the ability for students and coaches to connect and maybe build as robust a trusting and genuine relationship as if they had more in-person meetings. This happens every year too, but I think this year probably more than ever, students just kind of missing meetings and trying to reschedule, again, burnt out with Zoom, canceling last minute. Sometimes it might feel easier to cancel when it was going to be virtual, and that you're not leaving your coach kind of hanging at the library or coffee shop or something like that. I certainly felt more of a disconnect with my coaches. Again, I've coached for 5 years now, or I've supervised for 5 years, and this year certainly felt different as opposed to when we were always meeting in person. And certainly I had kind of less of ability and less an ability to kind of see just how well the coaching practices and skill building were taking place and happening during training and supervision as we were on Zoom. So I could only kind of see what I could see on the screen, whereas in person I certainly could provide a little bit more oversight on that and kind of assist as needed.
So as we finish up here, we tried to organize our thoughts into this rubric of start, stop, continue. Things that we want to continue to do, things we hope to stop doing, and things that we're going to, start doing. And I think we certainly see the value of continuing to use the Zoom platforms and Teams and all of that sort of thing for virtual supervision on an as-needed basis, because it provides more flexibility. I mean, we've certainly learned that in terms of the workspace as well, for people who are doing a lot of different things, students as well as staff. And I think we'll actually let Paul do that.
So stop, and certainly this has been emphasized, so you're probably recognizing the theme here. Sometimes we just got to throw out the coaching meeting agenda, right? Because coaching is a broad term, it happens in a lot of different ways, but the biggest key, and certainly this past year and going forward, was connecting. Building trust, building that rapport and that working relationship, and the production, if you can build that trust and relationship, the production of coaching academically, socially, environmentally is going to happen. It's going to happen a lot more naturally too. So while it's nice to have that meeting agenda and be structured, you got to recognize who's in front of you. You got to be present and respond and listen. And sometimes that means kind of throwing away the agenda for that day and just responding to the student in front of you. Certainly over the past year, and I think going forward too, that's certainly something that we learned as well. And continue, I think we can use virtual communication as a supplement to in-person work. Shared screen models are certainly more effective than just video calls. We used to just do like a lot of FaceTime, meet with the student in person, then follow up via FaceTime, but there's limitations with that. The shared screen aspect does provide a great way to coach collaboratively, to do work together, to actually see an email, to draft an email, and to send it to the professor too. So we can use that. We can continue to use that going forward. But I think it's helpful to just kind of do a start, stop, continue as a reflection of the past year and how we move forward with it. So that's it. That's kind of our quick way of how we adapted in a snapshot. I know that wasn't too much. So first and foremost, we'd love to connect with you further. If you have questions, we're going to be here throughout the webinar, and we can hang around after, or you can throw them in the chat. But here's our information too, our email, and those are our cell phones too. If you need to connect, we're happy to talk further, certainly about the past program this past year, but also going forward as well if you're interested in that. And thanks for taking the time to listen. I know it's late June, and there's probably a lot of places you could be, and we appreciate you being here and trying to further your work and listen to what we've been doing the past academic year.
Thank you, Paul and Dory. That was awesome. I'm going to move to Debbie. We will be having questions at the end. So if you do have questions, please feel free to throw them in the questions box, and we will moderate them after the final presentation. Thank you, everybody.
And thanks, Dee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. I want to thank also Dory and Paul. It's nice to hear your voices, my old colleagues from Boston University. It's really nice to be here with all of the presenters today and with all of you joining us from around the country. My name is Debbie Nicolellis. I'm with UMass Medical School in the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research. And I'm going to be talking about how our program, HYPE, has gone virtual. So I'll be talking about how our two programs related to HYPE have gone virtual, as well as some of our learnings and some of the implications for how we move forward. So it was really fun to hear about the PASS program as well. I want to give a shout out to our funders, both Nicolellis and the Department of Mental Health, for our other program, and mention that I am representing the HYPE team today, the larger team, especially Michelle Mullen, who is our clinical developer of HYPE and the principal investigator of our projects that I'll be talking about today. I'm probably going to talk through these slides relatively quickly, give you a real sense of what the heck HYPE is anyway, and give you a sense of like what our programs are, and then talk a bit about how we did our virtual pivots. I was calling myself the queen of pivots earlier today. You know, how we pivoted in this last year for two of our projects, HYPE on Campus and our virtual HYPE course, as well as I mentioned, our learnings and improvements. So as I talk, please feel free to write in any of your questions or your comments. I'll also give my contact information, our contact information, at the end of this presentation, but I'm really interested to hear what your questions and comments are. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A at the end. So let me talk a little bit about what HYPE is. So HYPE stands for Helping Youth on the Path to Employment. And it is a service model that, as I think about it, brings together some of the best of supported education, or that kind of program that supports young people, or any people really, who are in higher education, and the best of supported employment to help young people with mental health conditions, usually 18 to 30 years old, to advance their careers. HYPE is a pretty intensive support service. Usually in the first 4 months or so, we're meeting twice a week with each of the young people, and I'll tell you why later, and really focused on providing young people who are either looking at work or school or career direction with the kinds of skills, the kinds of resources and supports, and the accommodations and assistive technology that they might need for success at work and school and in their larger career. This takes some special training to kind of get up to speed on this. But there are lots of different kinds of providers who can be trained in HYPE. Right now, we're training graduate students who are students themselves to provide HYPE services right on campus. And I'll get to tell you a little bit about that as well. So HYPE is a service model that we think is really needed. And this kind of service, similar to PASS and other services, are really needed because we know from the research that upwards of 86% of college students who have mental health conditions experience academic disruptions. And that could be medical withdrawals or withdrawals out of classes or semesters, failing out of classes, that they experience more than the normal academic disruptions. And we also know that those who have experienced an academic disruption in the past are more likely to experience one again. So we know that intervening, kind of getting in there with what kinds of skills do you need, what kinds of supports do you need, how can we help you get through to graduation and beyond, is super important for this population. And I'll also say that we also know that if this were the number for any other group, there would be outrage and change would happen. We really want to impact the success of this group because they are highly impacted on the educational level. And we also know that without higher ed of some kind, whether it's training in the trades or college, that young adults are not protected against unemployment. So they're more likely to be unemployed as they go on into their careers. And they're not protected against underemployment. They're not paid as well. They don't have the kind of career options that others would have. So we're very, very invested in supporting the education of young adults with mental health conditions in that age group. And you can see the graphic here from the Bureau of Labor Statistics kind of bears out the more education that someone has, the more insulation they have against unemployment, and the more their earnings go up. So to affect that, I've been talking about skills, resources, and accommodations. We call this the 3 prongs of service, and fans of psychiatric rehabilitation will recognize these words, that we really want to support people around the skills that they need, what they need to learn how to do. And that for us in HYPE includes training in executive functioning, pulling together all of the resources and supports that a young person might need, both on campus and off campus, as well as supporting them in the use of and the access to accommodations and assistive technology, so that on all 3 levels, the young person has what they need in order to get through the hard times and persist toward future jobs, graduation, and all of the things that await them in their career. I want to mention the executive functioning piece in particular. So one of the main skill areas that we approach in HYPE, and the reason that we spend 2 hours or so a week per young person in the beginning of services with them, the first several months, is that we teach executive functioning skills through a manualized curriculum that has been tested. We're testing some more now, that really focuses on 4 different areas over 12 weekly sessions of facilitated learning. And these areas include prospective memory, which is remembering to remember. So it's time and task management. How do I calendar? How do I do a to-do list? How do I prioritize my tasks? This becomes super important for young people, and we start that at the very beginning of their learning through this curriculum, and then continue that learning throughout the course. We focus on attention and focus, in particular task attention and conversational attention. We look at memory strategies and learning strategies. So young adults are encouraged to try out a number of memory strategies, as well as increasing their capacity to get better and better at note-taking and study skills, so that they are set up to remember all of the things that they need to remember in school, and to be able to study in new ways to help them really get through and not get overwhelmed and bogged down during midterms and finals when it gets really hard. And then the last thing we do is to focus on cognitive flexibility and problem solving. That is, in a nutshell, some of the things that HYPE offers as a program. I'm going to be talking then about, or as a model, pardon me, I'm going to be talking about 2 programs that we offer. The first is how we made a virtual pivot in our program called HYPE on Campus. So HYPE on Campus, or HOC, I might say, is a service program and currently also a research project that is focused on 2 things: how HYPE helps college students with mental health conditions to persist in school. So we're really interested in looking at how does a program like this support currently registered, currently enrolled college students to keep on going even when times get tough. And certainly people experienced a lot of tough times during this last year during COVID. So what are the ways in which that we can impact that? And amongst other things like how much does it cost to offer HYPE, et cetera, we're looking at how to adapt HYPE for college settings. So this is the first time we have brought HYPE right to the college campus. Before HYPE on campus, we were doing HYPE in community agencies, and obviously it was in-person support and in-person training. And so we started to make a virtual pivot right at the beginning of COVID and big shutdowns. And this is why, is that COVID disrupted services for community settings and community providers. We weren't at all sure if sites would be able to continue serving people in school and really doing mobile educational support. So we started to think about, would it make more sense to just bring the support right to campus? We also knew that there was a tremendous need, both on the part of college students and their professors, to get support. You know, the word panic-goji was being tossed around a lot, that faculty were in crisis around trying to figure out how to help their folks learn. College students were struggling both with what the professors were struggling with, and then how could they engage and stay engaged. So the need was really great. And we also know that there are a lot of gaps in services on campus. One of our programmatic goals is to strengthen the kinds of relationships that services on campus have with each other so that we can better support students on campus. And we also knew that during COVID, there was an increased risk of students dropping out, stopping out, and not making it through their classes. So we really felt like it was an important thing for our project to make a virtual pivot. We wanted to go where the students were and indeed strengthen those relationships and services offered on campus as well as off campus. Our biggest pivot was actually that we are now fully virtual, or we have full virtual capacity. All of our services can now occur either virtually or in person, and I'll talk a little bit about how we got there. We made a major materials pivot. This is a picture of the front page of our FAST curriculum, now virtual materials. And we have a HYPE on campus training guide and other pieces. All of our worksheets, etc., are now shareable and fillable forms so that providers can do work with folks doing needs assessments, doing goal plans, doing any kind of worksheet together. They can pull it up on Zoom and share it and fill out the material with the student, or have the student fill it out with them, save it and send it to the student so that they have all of their information. And the university that we worked with this year is in New York at Binghamton University. They were not on campus at all until about now. I think they're about to come back on campus. So everything we did was online and on Zoom. FAST itself is highly gamified and has a lot of exercises, and we have made all of those games now digitally or electronically available so that people have a chance to do all of the practices and all of the skill development through Zoom and in an online environment, which has been wonderful. It was a challenge for us, but it was wonderful. And we also have virtual facilitator tips and instruction materials for the facilitators of FAST, our providers, which kind of brings me to our training pivot. we actually bought into and developed an entire course through an LMS, a learning management system. So we took our training that was usually, on-site days with, interacting, personally in person with providers. We took all of that to a learning management system and have developed an entire course to train our providers. It's 200 plus hours. And it is a flipped classroom. So we worked hard to gather and develop materials, including interactive videos, so that our providers could learn the information that they needed to learn on their own time, but then spend time with us in synchronous meetings to practice, to have discussion, to kind of work out the big questions, so that we weren't kind of wasting their time with lectures and stuff. That kind of material, the informational material, could happen in advance. We also developed a system of helping them to record their practice sessions and to submit them into the LMS so that we could then listen and provide feedback. So everything now that we do in our training for HYPE on Campus happens electronically and through Zoom and through our LMS. So it's been an exciting time. So I want to tell you a little bit about our second virtual pivot, and that is our HYPE courses, our virtual HYPE course. So I'll tell you kind of quickly that the HYPE course is for young adults. It's a class-based program for young adults with mental health conditions. We received funding from the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health to offer services around the state to help young adults to really figure out what they wanted to do for their career, get prepared for work and school. And originally, this was a 3-hour per week course that was held in a host agency. And we did that for 12 to 13 weeks. The 13th week was an orientation. And this included, it was in person, included lunch and FAST. We would do the FAST curriculum, the focus, skill, and strategy training curriculum, as well as preparation for career, work, and school. HYPE kind of happened in the middle of one of our classes, and we finished that on Zoom, but we quickly realized that this group who loved to talk to each other, even they who were already connected were having a bit of a hard time connecting for 3 hours, and we were too. So we transformed our curriculum to be 3 different classes. Now, career decisions, HYPE work prep, and HYPE school prep. And now they are 1.5 hour, sometimes 2 hour virtual sessions. The classes are 6 to 7 weeks, depending. And people come together from around the state. It's been wonderful. And we send out physical materials for them to work with, because it's a group of people and they really need to be able to apply the material to their own life. We also send them snacks and fidget toys, since we can't exactly provide lunch, but we do send snacks. And we send those by mail and materials by email, so that they have access to it electronically or in paper form. We did a lot of connecting via text, and we provide all of our sessions, individual sessions and classes, via Zoom. It was received very well. Most everyone said they were satisfied or very satisfied and would recommend the course to a friend. Those who came on the first day said that, attended all of the classes except one on average. So we were pretty glad to see that. So, our learnings overall in both the HYPE on Campus and the HYPE course programs were firstly that the virtual implementation and in-person implementation are obviously very different, and we had to do a lot of preparation in order to prepare providers to, implement these complex pieces, especially HYPE on campus, very complex model. I don't think I said before that we're now training agencies to provide the HYPE course, the virtual HYPE course, which has been a lot of fun, and training young adult facilitators as well as non-young adult facilitators if there's interest, so that, they get to offer this. We do the preparation in the background though, and that's one of the things that we learned is that there really is a lot of upfront preparation. As I think Paul said before, people get pretty tired of being on Zoom. So we shortened our classes, and we learned that we really have to teach folks who are offering the classes or offering the interventions to really engage differently and to ensure that the person is with you. And how do you do that? How do you kind of get the person talking or get the person involved, perhaps in different ways than they would have in person? But we also have found that people really welcomed the digital offerings that made it possible to connect during COVID. We had a lot of people come to and say, I needed something to do. I needed to talk to people. I'm so happy to be with you. And I'm so happy that you're interested in what we want to do for a career. Finally, we see a lot of impacts, and we are thinking about improvements even to our virtual pivots. We've been learning a lot this year. One of the things we're really grateful for is the expanded reach that it offers us. Certainly with the HYPE course, we're not restricted to one area where people can come physically, but we're able to serve young people all over the state at once, which has been really wonderful. We can flexibly attend to the needs of young people. And there is also flexibility in how we train people to offer these, where it happens, what gets covered and when. I'm constantly fidgeting with the course that we have to make sure that what we have in the course is attending to the needs of the providers we're training. Our materials got more specific over time, more attentive, I think, to what the provider and the young adult might need. So it really made us focus our attention on what the needs were even more than before. And now we are moving to put all of our training online, the HYPE course, fast training, and more. So we're excited about where this took us. If there was a silver lining of this past year, I think for us, it was that it's enabled us to figure out how to do more for more people. So we're excited about that. That's what I have for today. Until your questions and comments, feel free to contact us at hype@umassmed.edu or at our website, hypecareers.org. And that's it for me, Dee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Debbie. We're going to move to Vanessa Klodnick and Rebecca Johnson. Just give us one sec.
Hello. Can you hear us? We are introducing our virtual best practice guide for youth and young adult community mental health providers. This guidebook has evolved as we've explored all the nuances in delivering hybrid in-person and virtual team-based services. And our major goal has been to support other agencies like Thresholds in effectively building and maintaining virtual best practices to boost youth engagement. We want to do a big shout out to Neidler, our funder, and our two amazing research and innovation specialists, Ava Schneider and Brie LaPalooza. And thank you to, I guess, COVID-19 for pushing us to create this fun document and learn so much this year about the importance of virtual connecting. So we want to introduce ourselves. I'm Rebecca Johnson. I am a Youth and Young Adult Services Research and Innovation Coordinator. I lead and coordinate research projects here at Thresholds within our youth services, and I lead a lot of specialty projects with a team of colleagues, peers, young adult staff, and interns, and I also coordinate our youth advisory board. I am incredibly passionate about integrating youth voice into our work, And I feel like that is really present in this project that we've been working on, and pivoting all of our services through this pandemic, and hopefully beyond as an enhancement.
Yeah, I love that we haven't talked about what thresholds is. We'll get there in one slide. But hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa Klodnick. I'm the Director of Youth and Young Adult Services Research and Innovation at Thresholds, which is in Chicago. And I hold a faculty appointment at UT Austin's Institute for Excellence, Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health, where I lead or partner on a whole host of incredible research and evaluation projects. I do a lot of research of multidisciplinary team experiences. I'm really interested in the peer role. I'm interested in vocational roles for young people with serious mental health needs. And I love sticky ethical situations. I love working with young people. I love partnering with people with lots of different perspectives and life experiences. And I think I sort of love technology after this year, given how we've had to really lean into it. And although COVID-19 really has sucked, for this particular intervention that we're going to talk about, it really has helped us think about, and this, as this is said in the previous two talks, just really being more flexible and thinking of different ways to engage young people in material, to coach staff, to think out of the box. And I'm really excited about this guide that Dee will share with y'all, so you can take a look at it. It is very cool. Let me move this forward. And aims to be truly helpful for community mental health organizations. So today we'll talk about why we were uniquely able to build this guidebook, given the federally funded research project that we have that was housed in a community mental health center. We'll also talk about, just briefly, I'm going to say this right now, like, we built this because our expert advisors on the project essentially were like, this is fascinating. You need to capture this and you need to publish it. And I was like, let's make a toolkit, which then morphed into a guide. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Eileen Brennan at Portland State University for providing deeply helpful advice and support with really making this guidebook a reality. We're also going to talk about how we developed it. It's really important to share a little bit of the methodology of how this came to be. We'll describe what it is specifically. We're going to do a very brief overview and then 3 highlights that we think are completely the sexiest parts of the book, or not book, guide. And then we're going to share how you can get it. So perhaps we should have started with this, Rebecca, but I guess lesson learned for next time. So a little bit about Thresholds Research and Innovation within the Youth and Young Adult Services Division. Thresholds is the largest community mental health center in Illinois and has a very long history of partnering with researchers in developing, studying, and refining many of the evidence-based practices used in community mental health today. We also at Thresholds have a nationally recognized and rapidly evolving and expanding Youth and Young Adult Services Division that we fondly call YAYAs. You'll see YAYAs throughout this. YAYAs blends and enhances evidence-based practices to meet the needs of vulnerable and marginalized young people with serious mental health needs and their families. So YAYAs serves approximately 400 young people annually through multidisciplinary, community-based, and team-based care models that use the transition to independence process, or the TIP model, as their practice foundation. But Thresholds, YAYAs, also, I'm going to say, blends a number of evidence-based practices, including IPS-supported employment and education, DBT, CBT, and therapeutic crisis intervention, just to name a few. And finally, why we were uniquely situated to develop this guide is that YAYAs has its own research and innovation team that studies promising approaches at Thresholds and supports programs in using data for continuous quality improvement, and partners with a number of providers and state systems across the country to improve implementation of effective programs and interventions for young people. We love thinking about how to creatively engage young people and partner actively with young people, families, direct care staff, and program leaders to make their innovative ideas a reality. So that is us. But here is the research project that this came from.
So Back in October 2019, NIDLR funded our CORE project to implement and study our Threshold Developed CORE program, which stands for Career and Occupational Readiness Experience. CORE is an enhancement to the IPS model and offers a 2-phase, 15-week in vivo experience for young people with severe mental health challenges. So it includes 2 phases. The first is a 3-week classroom and community-based learning, and then a 12-week paid internship that is tailored towards the young person's career goals and supported by vocational peer mentors. And then we also are studying this, so we are completing semi-structured interviews with young people at the beginning and throughout the intervention, and then after the intervention to see where they go after they finish CORE.
So essentially, we had to figure out, how do we do this virtually in a safe, socially distanced way during COVID?
Like so many of you, I'm sure, back in March, we were about to roll out our first cycle of the CORE program in person, and COVID hit. So the world had definitely had other plans for us. So we rapidly went to remote and telehealth work. And in crisis mode, we paused CORE's rollout, and we just sort of sat and waited with the rest of the world to figure out what was going to happen next. So in April, we began to realize that COVID was not going anywhere, and we needed to begin coming up with a plan B. So we rapidly and quickly started working with leadership, our CORE committee, and all of the clinical teams to figure out like how to best move CORE from an in-person community-based program into something that we could do virtually. So we redeveloped all of our materials, we redeveloped all of the workshops and all of the plans. We worked with amazing community partners that were willing to partner with us to bring internships in, and we kind of set everything up. So in May, we realized how many barriers we truly had. So we had young people that didn't have access to Wi-Fi, no computers, our residences didn't have access to internet. And so we quickly started like looking for funding, working with our quality, legal, leadership, all of our different departments here at Threshold to figure out like how to best roll out technology into all of these different settings in a way that was going to really support the intervention, which led to a huge recruitment of young people, making sure we had access to all of the technology that was needed for this intervention, creating protocols and documents for young people to sign to agree to all sorts of different rules and regulations around use of technology. And in July and August, we rolled out CORE virtually, and we're rapidly successful with linking young people with internships, even in this bananas time of our whole world.
It was bananas.
It was.
Still kind of bananas.
Every day, which led to September when we took a breath and we're like, oh my goodness, look at all of the things that we were able to complete. And we started writing out everything that we did to pivot these services along with many other of our services like our youth advisory board into Zoom and other virtual platforms, and led to the creation of this guidebook. Our guidebook is broken into 2 major parts. The first details what your organization needs to consider and do to support virtual best practices. It includes recommendations for how to assess, implement, and refine systems and policies to support staff use of virtual tools, and more of that information on the leadership level. So thinking about the ethical considerations, how to learn from each other, how to really acknowledge and look at stuff like technology burnout, Zoom fatigue, all of those things that we've all experienced. And then our second part of our book is our best practices for teams and engaging participants. So this details those tips and tricks, how to take more of the how. So like how to take those ethical considerations and really like bring them into the ground, bring them into supervision in a way that's effective.
That's my favorite part, is all the stickiness. Oh, sorry, wait, let me pull this up. Is the stickiness of how do you really do this and maintain privacy and confidentiality, and also navigate all of the various learning curves around comfort and how to use technology. It definitely just, from the get-go, it seems so simple, like just to highlight throughout this process, we really need to take a step back and value the people that we know in our personal lives, in our organizations, our participants, our young people with lived and living experience with mental health needs. We really have to be like, wow, what an interesting idea that you'd like to use technology in a creative way to connect. And I should say that the virtual guidebook, it's really centered around telehealth as a platform and how do you use video conferencing in creative ways to deliver care on a multidisciplinary team. I think that that's really important to think, because there's a lot of different ways. I'm going to go on a tangent now, Rebecca. I can't help myself. What's so interesting is there's so much out there. There's so many mental health apps. There's so much we can be doing to help young people and families leverage their smartphone for their own wellness. So we have a far way to go with that. But the one thing is for providers, so on an organizational level, is when your staff or participants or anyone comes to you and it's like, oh my gosh, I've got this great idea. I'd really like to engage this young person creatively by doing, fill in the blank that's related and going to leverage some kind of video conference platform. We know, honestly, that instead, and we often cringe, we usually respond with, oh, wait, can't do that. That's not okay. Or the HIPAA doesn't allow for that. And the one thing I've noticed from taking a step back and reflecting on this whole process is our urge to kind of immediately go back to, we've never done that. That's old school. Like we are going to err on the side of protection, and we're not going to think like, gosh, how might we use technology to really engage? And so instead, it's so simple. But when you hear something exciting from someone and you're like, instead of being like, no, we can't do that, being like, hey, tell me more, help me understand. What would that look like? What does it look like? Before we shut something down or shame someone out of potentially using technology. One more thing to say is that technology is going to keep changing. What we use now, we probably won't be using in 5 years. And so I think that we need to be nimble and stay on our feet if we're going to provide culturally attuned and developmentally attuned services. We know most young people, and we know most of our staff at our community mental health centers have smartphones. And so if we're not willing to learn, what the new tech is as community mental health providers, that may hurt us with our engagement, and it may lead to us not providing developmentally or culturally attuned care. We have to learn the real benefits. So one of the things we observed over time was it wasn't clearly, and we had to learn this, like, what are the benefits of this? What are the drawbacks? Community mental health providers deeply need to understand what's good about this and what's not, and how to get in front of things that might not be good and prevent those, potentially negative outcomes. And then to really emphasize, how do we support the benefits of virtual connecting? In the guidebook, we have wonderful lists that I think are very, very helpful that you can take and use when explaining, here are the actual benefits of using, video conferencing platforms to engage young people. One thing we want to make really clear is that this guidebook does not suggest that virtual connecting is the best way to connect and provide support. Virtual connecting is, I would say, supplement for services that are in person, that can be done in a variety of ways. And it really increases the flexibility that staff have and young people have to foster connecting when maybe you most need it. Just traveling always to an office isn't easy for a lot of people. And being able to connect briefly via video platform can be super helpful for helping young people with making progress on their goals and celebrating something that, they've done well in their, at school or at work. But there are real drawbacks. And one big one is Zoom fatigue. It is legit real. So we do have a section on wellness, virtual wellness for staff and participants, things to really consider to set up, healthy and safe connecting virtually. Also, and this is, the title of this slide, but really valuing virtual champions. And, at Threshold right away, our peer mentors and our peer support staff were the champions of virtual connecting and communicating and really finding ways to do this. And we think this is because typically our peer staff are younger, but not that much younger than the other staff on the teams. But one thing is that peer relationships tend to be a little different. And our peer support providers are constantly thinking about and are trained in and professionally supported in maintaining healthy relational boundaries while also sharing things that are personal about themselves. And so that's their daily work. And so with introducing virtual connecting, other members of the team, such as the supported employment education specialists, the therapists, the case managers, had to think about this stuff in a more nuanced way than they typically had when virtually connecting. And finally, I just want to say this is so simple, but I want to emphasize it because I made mistakes. I feel like a lot of people I know made mistakes, but practicing on these telehealth and video conferencing platforms before doing them is so incredibly critical. We need to feel more comfortable with navigating how to mute, how to unmute, how to turn on your video, how not to. You just don't do it without practicing it. And that is the biggest takeaway. With more, there's going to be new technology that's coming, and we're going to get excited about it. And we really, as organizations, have to invest in not just training. A one-time training isn't the answer. We need to create spaces for people to get comfortable with practicing using the technology. And definitely over the last year, we have encouraged, Rebecca actually provided these amazing drop-in, I'm going to say virtual Zoom coaching sessions that were low stakes. So people could just message Rebecca and be like, I have no idea how to turn off my video or turn it on, and really practicing it. And so we really encourage practicing the virtual technology with your participants, practice it with each other, practice it with your supervisor, with your team. Practice, practice, practice. It's really critical to do that. Seems so simple, but was something that was not to our experience. We really needed to emphasize that and create space and time for that. Okay. Setting up and maintaining healthy and safe virtual connecting.
It is important that program leadership work with the appropriate teams to develop and refine guidelines for virtual connecting for staff and participants. These guidelines should support use of virtual connecting in ways that are safe, effective for participants and families and staff. They should also be thinking about these guidelines and expectations that would introduce at the start for staff to encourage creating positive virtual connecting relationships. So really taking the time and the energy to introduce what's going to happen, or things that could, like sticky situations that can come up even in the Zoom, like when you get kicked out or your screen freezes, to make it really comfortable at the beginning. And also for clinical teams to think about like what expectations to put out when they're using things like texting and things like that right away. Leaders should also encourage staff to bring in examples of sticky situations that arise related to virtual connecting, and take time to process and talk openly about things that come up in the virtual world with participants. This should be a common practice in supervision and team meetings. We are all connected through the virtual world and really need to make sure that we're talking about even things like dating apps and like falling into like finding someone's Instagram page or someone's video coming up on your TikTok For You page. Leaders should really encourage that and be open to those discussions, which can create trust and allow for more effective and ways to handle those sticky situations. And finally, program leaders and direct care staff should work together to determine when and how to use virtual technology as an enhancement to in-person community support. We offer lots of sort of ideas of when to look at virtual technology, when to maybe meet in person, based on the research that we found and ethical guidelines that we've reviewed. And we encourage you all to look into your state guidelines, your licensure guidelines, and your agency guidelines to make those best decisions. But it can be such an important enhancement to that in-person community support that can create access for young people in all sorts of settings. Our last highlight is our incorporation of 2 tip sheets, which are accessible tips and tricks for working virtually with participants and also working effectively as a team in the virtual world. I think one thing that we've all taken away from this last year is that there's so many ways that we as teams, whether that be research teams or clinical teams, need to connect together in order to do the best work possible. And so we're offering these tip sheets as part of this guidebook that can be pulled out and talked through in different team settings. So the first one is this virtual, more tips for working with virtually with participants. And then we have one for working with teams.
Yes, and the way that we came up with this was working directly with young people with lived and living experience and also direct care staff to really create simple tools that make virtual connecting feel like it's the expectation. This is not going to go away. Young people are going to come across our dating profiles, their social media profiles, and staff are going to come across theirs. And so just the expectation is that, you know, young people have smartphones, many of them have Wi-Fi access or data plans, as do staff. And so really moving the field into this space, which feels very progressive and exciting, but really thinking, and I just want to reiterate something that Rebecca said, is this interesting piece of figuring out how and when to supplement in-person services with virtual communication or virtual support. And that is definitely the field right now, I think, is really wrestling with this notion of how to do that. Will billing, will insurance, you know, Medicaid and commercial insurance, will they continue to fund these things and cover these types of supports? And it looks like across the country, yes, there are bills being passed in states all across the country to continue what COVID has allowed, which is this virtual connecting. We definitely, I also want to add, this is a live document. The first version's coming out live today with y'all. But if you, as you're reading through it and you've got other great ideas, or if you have questions, or you're like, oh my God, that's so off the mark, like what is going on in Chicago with the core study, please feel free to reach out and email us. We're going to provide our contact information. Oh, and quickly, the guidebook, we're going to share it with you guys. All registrants will be able to get it in a PDF copy. We'll also be putting it online soon. But if you have, you know, any questions or thoughts or ideas, or we love sticky situations, as we've talked about, the real ethics around providing safe, brave, you know, productive spaces for healing and wellness can be achieved virtually. And I think that, you know, a lot of times there's our own biases and our own, you know, just fear of, God, goodness, what if someone learns something about me, that we really do have to talk through. And some of our vignettes that are in the guidebook are really helpful with that. But there's only a couple. We could use some more. So if you have ideas and would like to, you know, connect with us, we would love to talk with you. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. And just, you know, be brave, virtually connect.
Thank you so much, everyone. Those were really great presentations. Please feel free to send any of your questions through the questions box. To start it off, I have a question about, do you have thoughts on how best to transition back to in-person, or how best to create a hybrid model and any barriers? And feel free, anyone, to jump in.
This is Vanessa. Just really quickly, I want to say that is definitely the #1 question facing, I'm going to say, arguably every community mental health provider in the country and maybe internationally. How do you do this? What are the questions that each site needs to be asking? Under which conditions would virtual connecting be the best kind of support, the most effective, and when is in person the most effective and most needed, based on, you know, young person preference, family preference, staff preference, or staff availability, young person availability. It becomes very complicated because there's a lot of factors. The way that we're wrestling with it right now, we have some pages in the guidebook that really are asking these questions that I just posed. But one thing is to think about, like, as an agency, getting together and really talking about these things and developing guidelines to guide care. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a supervision or team-based decisions around how and why and when, and also the extent to which of course, the staff and the young people and the families have that technology, have the Wi-Fi access. There's all these little things that we made assumptions about that, like, really, like, you could have the best, you know, training or, you know, service to provide, but if you don't have the basic tools, it's not going to happen. But definitely, it's people are wrestling with this, and I think you're going to see guidelines coming out. But I do want to refer you guys to, I'm like, which section we can refer. I can put it in the chat in the guidebook. Good question.
Yeah, I would just add on to, from the peer coaching program or certainly working with students on a college campus, we try and meet students where they're at. Some students might still not want to meet in person, and that's okay too. And we'll kind of address that as it comes up, whether it be, supporting them via text or phone, FaceTime, or Zoom, whatever they need. But if they need that in person, then that's certainly what we're going to provide as well. So I think it's flexibility. It's having the coaches kind of understand what might work best for their student, and every student is probably looking for something a little bit different too, and finding the right combination of that. So having an open mindset, certainly from a coaching standpoint, I think allows us to kind of recognize the student and their individual needs, and then try and meet them specifically where they are and get them the right amount of support, whether that be in person or virtually too. So we'll certainly continue to do some type of combination work and support in a lot of different ways.
Great, thank you. So this was kind of an interesting question. What ways were, or if there were any ways that culturally diverse youth were supported in virtual meetings? Did you find you had to do anything different or adjust your techniques?
I can talk just, we had coaches that were working with us that were living in India, and they had a totally different time schedule just from that standpoint. And, that certainly required, from a weekly supervision standpoint, to find a time that was going to work for them and everyone, that was a reasonable time, but also from the coach to be able to connect with students, working with that 12-hour time difference, I think it was, to meet on a schedule that worked for the student and the coach, and to kind of to make sure that they were taking care of themselves too. So the time differences, I think we saw certainly come up quite a few times, and took a little bit more thoughtfulness and scheduling and commitment to that too. And I know the coach that was coaching from India, was very open about that, and shared, here's where I am, here's my situation, I want to work with you, I want to be as supportive as possible. But this is kind of what will work best for me, and probably work best with our coaching too. So just being open and communicative about that, and having an understanding from both sides. That came up quite a bit though.
This is Debbie. I'll add that one of the things that we've been trying to be very thoughtful about is hiring and training a really diverse group of providers, so that they could bring their expertise and to the work that they're doing, and that has been really important. Hiring folks who are really interested in LGBTQ issues, hiring folks with a variety of perspectives, I think has been really important to us. It's one of the ways that we've been really trying to attend to folks virtually, is by varying our expertise.
Hi, this is Rebecca Johnson. We here at Threshold serve primarily young people of color, primarily Black and African American youth. And with CORE and with our advisory board, we spent a lot of time doing a lot of assessing of what young people needed. And so we made sure that we were able to get any sort of resources so that young people of all races across our entire city of Chicago and our surrounding suburbs had access to the technology they needed to participate in services. So it was a big push. And also with the advisory board, going virtual in the midst of George Floyd being killed and all of the things and all of the movements last summer, we spent a lot of time being able to process that and bringing in our workforce development to do online trainings. And I actually think that because of our virtual connecting, we were able to really process and be together through some of those major life crises that happened in 2020, that we wouldn't have been able to access those same young people without having this virtual platform.
Yeah, can I add something, Vanessa? something that I thought was really intriguing is we get on a group call, Zoom call with a bunch of young people. It's going to be really different than, with a bunch of administrators or researchers and just letting go of the expectation of like, what is professionalism, just expect that young people are moving on the go a lot. So, wherever they're calling in from, our advisory board members would be like on the bus calling in, and we're just excited they're calling in, right? We're not going to shame like, oh, it's really loud, mute, we mute for them. I think there's things about like basic where it's like, hey, everyone needs to know the basics of Zoom. It's you show you're respectful by knowing how to navigate it. I think and I hadn't thought about this until this moment, but it is really intriguing to kind of let go of like the professional, AKA standard of like, office type like Zoom use and realize that young people are going to be accessing it. And, young people and families of color who are living in neighborhoods that don't have necessarily access to, lots of community mental health care or technology to connect, might be connecting in ways that aren't like the expected way to connect. And so being willing to be flexible and open and supporting, different ways to connect, I think is really critical. And I definitely saw it in person. And, some of the young people I got, it was like a free for all on some of those calls. I was like, oh my God, what is going on? And I had to fight my own bias, right? I'm like, maybe that's the way Zoom should be. Maybe I've been trained, to live this boring Zoom etiquette life, right? So I think there's definitely some opportunity to embrace some of the more flexible virtual connecting that I definitely observed with young people and with the advisory board.
Thank you. I wanted to let everyone know that the guide that Vanessa has been referring to is as a handout in the Handouts tab, and will also be posted on the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research's website, along with the other materials from today. So if folks want to go back and see the presentations and the recording, they'll be up there. Have a couple minutes left. I have one more question that seems to have come in a little bit, was like engaging either the youth directly or even the other folks you worked with, like Hype on Campus may have not been working directly with young adults, but how did you keep folks engaged when it was a virtual platform?
Well, I can speak from the, Hype on Campus and Hype course perspective. I mean, one of the things that we did as we trained our providers to offer these services directly to young adults is, the many ways that you can engage someone. One is, a lot of flexibility, as I think Vanessa may have mentioned before. It's a tough thing out there. I think several people have mentioned that it's easier in some ways to not come to a Zoom meeting than to come to a meeting at the library that Paul talked about. So we made sure that the providers who are working in this program really tried their hardest to be very flexible, a lot of reaching out through text and connecting through text in any way that the young person felt comfortable connecting. And then, we employed, depending on what we were doing with them, we employed a lot of strategies, a lot of working side by side, as much as you can do over Zoom from different localities, to fill things out together, work on emails together, and really getting the person talking and really showing a lot of empathy for what they were going through. I think a combination of all of these worked to engage our folks who stayed pretty well engaged throughout the semesters that they were working with us. There's probably more that we are learning about how best to engage folks, but those were some of the strategies that worked for us.
Real quickly, I would just say, I mean, we were creative. We tried to make it fun. We, encouraged our coaches to talk about current events, just like you would with friends if you were in person too. It didn't have to all be academic and goal setting and priorities and studying. to make time for that in-person connection. And I mentioned it multiple times, but be a peer and connect and listen. And as Debbie said, empathize, be creative, put things on the screen, make it come to life, have it be interactive, make it different from, maybe what it was like sitting through a class and being lectured at. We wanted the opposite of that, very interactive, one-on-one, interested in engaging that way. So just being creative and flexible, and that, that took some time and supervision and a collaborative effort from the coaches and certainly myself, coming up with different ideas too.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our presenters. We really appreciate you taking the time today to present, and thank you, everyone, for attending today. If you have any further questions, you can contact the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research, and we can forward any questions along to the presenters. And thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.